My biological parents walked into my adoptive parents' estate meeting and told me I had no right to keep the inheritance. My birth mother looked me straight in the face and said, "You were never really theirs. You were just placed there." Then my birth father added, "And if you're living off what we gave up, the decent thing is to share it with your real family." That was the first time I understood they hadn't come back because they missed me. They came back because I had finally become worth something. My name is Mara Whitlock, and I was 29 when both of my adoptive parents were gone. My dad, Calvin, died first after a long fight with kidney disease. My mom, Lenora, followed 8 months later after a stroke that she never fully recovered from. Losing them so close together felt like having the floor removed twice before I even learned how to stand again. They were the only parents I had ever known. I always knew I was adopted. They never hid it from me. My mom used to say, "Your story started before us, but we are lucky we got to be in most of it." She kept a small photo album from my adoption day in the living room cabinet. There were pictures of my dad holding me with both hands like I was made of glass, my mom crying with no makeup on, and the three of us standing in front of the little brick courthouse where the adoption was finalized. I grew up in a nice house outside Columbus, Ohio. Not mansion nice, but comfortable. My dad owned part of a regional equipment leasing company with his college friend. My mom was a school counselor for almost 30 years. They weren't flashy people. Dad still used coupons. Mom drove the same navy blue Subaru until the seat fabric started splitting, but they were careful, consistent, and generous in the quiet ways that mattered. They paid for my college. They helped me put a down payment on my first condo. They taught me how to read a bank statement before they ever taught me how to apply mascara. So when their attorney, Ms. Aveline Brooks, called me in for an estate administration meeting, I already knew it was going to hurt. Not because of the money, because every document had their names on it, and every signature reminded me that they had planned for a world where I would have to live without them. The estate was larger than I expected. My dad's shares in the company had been transferred into a trust. Their house was paid off. There were retirement accounts, life insurance, and an investment portfolio my father had built slowly over decades. Most of it went into a protected trust with me as the sole beneficiary, but the trust also funded a small scholarship at my mother's old school. That part made me cry. I remember sitting in Ms. Brooks's conference room staring at the paragraph about the scholarship and hearing my mother's voice telling some anxious 8th grader, "You are not your worst day." I was not ready for strangers to walk into that room and claim her life's work, but that is exactly what happened 3 weeks later. Ms. Brooks had scheduled a second meeting at the trust company's office because there were some business transfer documents I needed to sign. The trust officer, a calm woman named Priya Sandel, was there. So was my dad's former business partner, Howard Keene. We were talking about voting rights on my father's company shares when the receptionist opened the glass door and said, "Ms. Whitlock, there are people here who say they're family." I thought maybe it was my mom's cousin from Dayton, or one of Dad's old employees. Then 3 people walked in. A thin woman with dyed auburn hair and a purse covered in gold hardware, a broad-shouldered man in a wrinkled sport coat that smelled faintly like cigarettes, and a younger man around my age wearing a hoodie under a blazer, like he had dressed up under protest. The woman stared at me like she was trying to decide whether to hug me or inspect me. "Mara," she said. I stood up slowly. "Do I know you?" She pressed a hand to her chest. "I'm Rena Dobbs. I'm your mother." The room went so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioner. The man beside her stepped forward. "And I'm Dale, your father." My whole body went cold, but not in the dramatic way people describe in movies. It was more practical than that. My fingers went numb. My mouth dried out. I looked at Ms. Brooks because I needed someone in that room to tell me whether this was real or some mistake. Ms. Brooks's expression changed in a way I still think about. She didn't look surprised. She looked prepared. The younger man lifted his chin. "I'm Brennan, your brother." I didn't say anything. Rena gave me a soft, wounded smile. "We know this is a shock, sweetheart. But we heard about Lenora and Calvin and we thought it was time." "Time for what?" I asked. Dale looked around the conference room, then at the folders on the table. "For the truth, and for the family to be made whole." Priya's pen stopped moving. Ms. Brooks stood. "Mr. and Mrs. Dobbs, this is a private trust meeting. You were not invited." Rena's face tightened for half a second before the sad smile came back. "We're not here to cause trouble. We're here because our daughter deserves to know where she comes from." Brennan laughed under his breath. "And because some people got rich off our family." My stomach twisted. I had imagined meeting my biological parents before, mostly when I was younger. In those imagined scenes there were tears, awkward hugs, maybe hard explanations. I imagined poverty, fear, regret. I imagined a mother who had given me up because she wanted me to have better than she could give. I never imagined them walking into a trust office and looking at my dead parents' estate documents like an open buffet. "I need you to leave," I said. Rena's eyes filled quickly, too quickly. "That's your first sentence to me?" Dale put a hand on her shoulder. "She's overwhelmed." Brennan looked at me with open resentment. "Must be overwhelming, inheriting everything while your actual family is drowning." Ms. Brooks stepped around the table. "This meeting is over for today." Dale didn't move. "We have a lawyer too." "Then your lawyer may contact me," Ms. Brooks said. Rena looked at me again. Her voice softened. "Mara, you don't know what we lost. We were young. We were pressured. The Whitlocks had money. We had nothing." That was the first crack in me, because my parents had never, ever spoken badly about the people who gave birth to me. My mom always said, "They made a painful choice." My dad always said, "You were loved before you were ours, even if it was complicated." I had built a whole quiet belief around that. Rena took one step closer. "We gave you the life you have. You would not have that inheritance if we hadn't let you go." And there it was, not grief, not reunion, a transaction. I picked up my purse. "I'm leaving." Brennan blocked the edge of the doorway just enough to make it awkward. "You can't even hear us out?" Howard, my father's business partner, stood up then. He was in his 70s and usually moved slowly, but his voice was sharp. "Move." Brennan blinked. "Excuse me?" Howard pointed at the door. "You heard me." Brennan stepped aside, muttering, "Rich people always protect rich people." I walked out before I gave them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. The next week was awful. Rena found my Facebook page and messaged me long paragraphs about healing. Dale left voicemails saying we needed to settle this like family. Brennan sent me a Venmo request for $10,000 with the note, "Emergency family support." When I declined it, he sent another for $25,000 and wrote, "Less than what you owe." Then the comments started. Rena posted a picture of me from my mom's obituary page and wrote, "After 29 years, we found our stolen daughter, but wealth changes people." I had relatives I had never met calling me cold. One woman with the last name Dobbs messaged, "Your parents suffered every day after losing you. You should be ashamed for choosing money over blood." Choosing money over blood. I had just buried the woman who sat beside me through every fever, every breakup, every college panic attack, every impossible day of my life. And strangers were telling me I had chosen wrong. At first, I almost answered. I typed and deleted replies. I wanted to explain that Calvin and Lenora were not kidnappers. I wanted to explain that I was not hoarding gold in a tower. I wanted to explain that grief had made even grocery shopping feel impossible, and now I had people demanding a share of my dead parents' life. Ms. Brooks told me not to engage. "These situations feed on emotion," she said over the phone. "Let them put things in writing. Every message helps us understand what they're trying to do." "What are they trying to do?" I asked. There was a pause. "I have a suspicion," she said, "but I need your permission to show you something your mother left in the trust file." My heart started pounding. "My mother?" "Yes, Lenora wrote instructions. She asked me to give you certain documents only if the Dobbs family contacted you after her death." I sat down on my kitchen floor because my knees suddenly didn't feel reliable. My mom knew? She knew enough to be worried. 2 days later, I went to Ms. Brooks's office alone. She placed a brown accordion folder in front of me. On the tab, in my mother's handwriting, were the words, "For Mara, if they ever come back." I couldn't touch it at first. Ms. Brooks didn't rush me. She just sat quietly while I stared at that handwriting and cried harder than I had cried at the funeral. When I finally opened the folder, the first page was a letter. "My darling Mara, if you are reading this, then the people who gave birth to you have found you in the worst possible way. I am sorry. Your father and I hoped this day would never come, but we also knew hope is not a plan. Please hear this before anything else. You were never purchased by us. You were never stolen by us. You were never a debt we owed anyone. You were our daughter. Not because a court said so, although the court did. Not because of our estate plan, although we protected you there too. You were our daughter because we loved you every day, in every ordinary moment, long before money was part of the story. Then came the documents. The adoption paperwork was all legal, court-stamped, properly filed, signed consents from Rena and Dale Dobbs. But behind it was something I had never seen before. Copies of old cashier's checks, emails from a private adoption facilitator named Marjorie Kess, and a notarized statement from the nurse who had helped report her years later. According to the documents, Rena and Dale had not been helpless teenagers pressured into giving me up. They were 26 and 29. They had already had one child, Brennan, who was 2 at the time. They had contacted the facilitator while Rena was still pregnant and asked specifically whether financial assistance could be arranged with a professional family. There were emails that made my skin crawl. One from Dale said, "We are not interested in an open arrangement unless the couple can help us get current. We have debts and another child to think about." Another from Rena said, "If they are serious and have money, we can sign quickly, but we need something before delivery." The cashier's checks had been written as living expenses, which can be legal in some private adoption situations, but Ms. Brooks pointed to a handwritten receipt tucked behind them. It was signed by Dale. Received additional $18,000 cash for final consent. No further contact. I read that line 4 times. No further contact. My birth father had put a price beside disappearing from my life. My adoptive parents had not known about the cash payment at the time. They believed they were covering medical bills and approved pregnancy-related expenses through the facilitator. Years later, after that facilitator was investigated in another case, my mother was contacted by someone who had found old files. By then I was 14. Mom and Dad hired an attorney, confirmed that my adoption was secure, and decided not to tell me until I was older. Then I got older, and my dad got sick. Then life kept happening. In her letter, Mom admitted she regretted not telling me sooner. I didn't feel angry at her. I felt devastated that she had carried fear for years because of people who had already taken money once. At the bottom of the folder was the part that changed everything. My parents had amended their trust after learning the truth. Not to hide anything from me, but to protect me. There was a clause stating that no biological relative, claimant, or outside party could receive distributions from the trust based on biological relationship, emotional pressure, public accusation, or alleged family obligation. Any attempt to coerce, threaten, defame, or interfere with the beneficiary could trigger legal action paid for by the trust. My dad had also written a short note on yellow legal paper. Mara? Some people mistake access for love. Some people will call you selfish when you refuse to be useful to them. Don't confuse guilt with duty. You don't owe anyone your life because they regret what they did with theirs. Dad. I pressed that note against my chest and sobbed. A week later, the Dobbs family requested a mediation meeting. Their attorney, a man named Victor Lamb, sent a letter claiming Rena and Dale had been emotionally manipulated by wealthy adopters and were prepared to pursue equitable family restitution. Ms. Brooks said that phrase meant almost nothing legally, but it sounded threatening enough to scare someone into a settlement. They want money to go away, she said. Then let's give them an answer, I said. The meeting was held in a neutral conference room at a title and escrow company because Mr. Lamb also claimed there might be issues with the transfer of my parents' house into my trust. It was ridiculous, but Miss Brooks said neutral ground would make the record cleaner. I arrived with Ms. Brooks and Priya. The Dobbs family was already there. Rena looked polished this time. Cream sweater, gold earrings, soft makeup. Dale looked irritated, like the meeting was taking too long before it had even started. Brennan had brought a tablet and kept tapping the screen. Rena stood when I entered. Mara. I didn't sit near her. She looked wounded by that, which would have been more convincing if she had not spent the previous 2 weeks calling me an ungrateful stolen daughter online. Mr. Lamb began with a speech about healing. He said adoption trauma was complex. He said his clients had lived with pain. He said my inheritance story did not erase the moral rights of the family of origin. Then he slid a paper across the table. It was a proposed settlement. They wanted $750,000, plus payment of Dale's urgent debts, Brennan's housing stabilization costs, and a written statement from me acknowledging that Calvin and Lenora Whitlock had benefited from the Dobbs family's loss. I actually laughed once, not because it was funny, but because my body had no other place to put the shock. Dale leaned forward. That's less than 10% of what you got. I looked at him. You know what I got? Brennan smirked. Public records exist. Rena's voice became soft again. We're not trying to hurt you, but you have to understand what it felt like to see our daughter living in comfort while we struggled. You gave me up, I said. Rena flinched. We were pressured. Ms. Brooks opened her folder. Dale's eyes went to it immediately. Rena kept talking. Your adoptive parents had power. We were young and poor. You were 26 and 29, I said. Her mouth closed. Brennan looked from me to his mother. What? Dale said. That's not the point. It is the point, I said. My voice shook, but I kept going. Because you didn't come here asking to know me. You came here asking to be paid for me again. Rena's face changed. Not fully. Just enough. The softness drained out of her eyes. Mr. Lamb cleared his throat. I would advise against inflammatory language, Ms. Brooks said. Then you'll want to advise your clients to stop defaming mine. She placed copies of the emails on the table, then the cashier's checks, then the handwritten receipt. Dale went pale in a patchy way, starting around his mouth. Brennan grabbed one of the pages. "What is this?" Rena whispered. "Old paperwork." I looked at my brother, my biological brother, the man who had sent me a Venmo request like I was an ATM with matching DNA. "It's the paperwork showing they arranged the adoption for money," I said, and then signed a receipt for an additional cash payment after I was born. Brennan's eyes moved across the page. $18,000? Dale snapped. "Put that down." But Brennan didn't. "You told me she was taken." Rena's eyes filled again, but this time it looked more like panic than sadness. It was complicated. We were desperate. Dale hit the table with his palm, not hard enough to be violent, but hard enough to make the water bottles jump. We had bills. We had a toddler. We did what we had to do. I stared at him. There it was. No apology, no grief, just justification. "You sold me," I said. Rena covered her mouth. "Don't say it like that." "How would you like me to say it?" No one answered. Ms. Brooks slid another document forward. "This is the Whitlock Family Trust provision regarding coercion, harassment, and third-party claims. Ms. Whitlock has no authority to distribute trust assets to you even if she wanted to without triggering review, and after the messages, public posts, and this settlement demand, we are prepared to send a cease and desist immediately." Mr. Lamb's face had gone stiff. "I was not provided these documents by my clients," he said. Dale glared at him. "Whose side are you on?" "The side of not being misled by my own clients, mister," Lamb said coldly. That was the moment the room shifted. For weeks, they had made me feel cornered, like I was the cruel one, the greedy one, the daughter who had been given too much and owed the world an apology for it. But sitting there, watching their own attorney slowly realize what they had hidden, I felt the corner open behind me. Priya spoke for the first time. "The trust company will not recognize any claim from the Dobbs family. Any further attempts to interfere with trust assets will be documented." Brennan threw the paper down. "So what? That's it? She just gets everything?" I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of his anger. "No," I said. "I get what my parents left me." Rena whispered, "We are your parents." I shook my head. "You are the people who gave me a beginning. Calvin and Lenora gave me a life." Her face crumpled, but I didn't rush to comfort her. That might sound cold. Maybe a year earlier I would have hated myself for not softening, but grief had already taken so much from me. I was not going to hand over my piece too. Dale stood up. "You'll regret humiliating your own blood." Ms. Brooks looked at him. "Sit down, Mr. Dobbs. You are currently in a recorded conference room threatening my client." He sat. The meeting ended with no settlement. Mr. Lamb withdrew from representing them 2 days later. Ms. Brooks sent the cease and desist. Rena deleted the post about me being stolen, but not before several people had screenshotted it. When the truth started leaking through their side of the family, the messages changed. A woman who had called me heartless wrote, "I didn't know about the money. I'm sorry." An uncle I had never met said Dale had been gambling for years and had recently lost money he borrowed against a work truck. Another cousin told me Rena had been using credit cards in other people's names, and Brennan had been living in their basement while refusing every job that did not respect his potential. I didn't answer most of them. I had spent my entire life not knowing these people, and somehow they had still managed to exhaust me. Brennan messaged once more. "Look, I didn't know they got paid, but I'm still your brother. I'm not them. I could really use help getting out of here." I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me felt sorry for him. He had been lied to too. But another part of me remembered him blocking the doorway, smirking at me, sending payment requests, and acting like my loss was his opportunity. I wrote back, "I hope you build a better life than the one they taught you to expect from other people, but I can't be the way you escape them." Then I blocked him. Rena sent a letter by mail a month later. It was 6 pages long. She said she had loved me in her own way. She said poverty makes people do things. She said Calvin and Lenora should have helped them more. She said she hoped one day I would understand a mother's pain. She never wrote the words, "I'm sorry I sold you." So I put the letter in a folder and gave it to Ms. Brooks. I did not sue them. I could have pushed harder after the defamation, but Ms. Brooks warned me that legal revenge can become its own kind of cage. Instead, we strengthened the trust protections, documented everything, and made sure they could never walk into another office and pretend they had a claim. Then I did something that felt like breathing for the first time in months. I went to my parents' house alone. The house was technically mine, but I still thought of it as theirs. The kitchen smelled like lemon oil because my mom used to polish the table every Sunday. Dad's reading glasses were still in the little ceramic dish by his chair. For a while, I just walked from room to room, letting myself remember ordinary things. Mom cutting apples at the counter, Dad pretending not to cry at my college graduation. The three of us arguing about whether Thanksgiving stuffing should have sausage in it. None of it had anything to do with blood. On the mantel, there was a framed photo from my adoption day. I used to think the most important thing in that picture was me as a baby. After everything, I realized it was my parents' faces. They looked terrified. They looked grateful. They looked like two people who understood love was not ownership. It was responsibility. I used part of the money they left me to fund the scholarship at my mother's school for 10 years instead of 5. The first award went to a girl who had aged out of foster care and wanted to study social work. When I handed her the certificate, she cried, and I had to blink hard because I knew Mom would have loved her immediately. I also kept my dad's company shares, at least for now. Howard still calls me every quarter to explain reports I only half understand. He always starts by saying, "Your dad would be proud." And I always pretend I don't need a second before answering. People call stories like mine revenge stories, and I understand why. There was a kind of karma in watching the Dobbs family lose the narrative they tried to use against me. There was satisfaction in seeing documents do what my shaking voice could not. There was relief in realizing they could not take my inheritance, my home, or my parents' names and twist them into something ugly. But the real revenge was quieter than that. It was not writing the check. It was not begging them to love me. It was not letting the people who sold me decide what family meant. My biological parents gave me life. I won't deny that. But Calvin and Lenora Whitlock gave me birthday pancakes, school pickup, braces, bedtime stories, emergency room visits, honest advice, boundaries, patience, and a home where I never once felt like a transaction. For a long time, I wondered if meeting my birth family would complete some missing part of me. Instead, it taught me that I was not incomplete. I was loved, fully, deliberately, legally, emotionally, in every way that mattered. So if you were in my position, would you have given them anything just to make them go away? Do you think I should ever forgive Rena, Dale, or Brennan? Or is forgiveness different when someone only comes back for money? Let me know what you would have done, because I still think about it more often than I admit. Thank you for listening to my inheritance story. If you enjoy inheritance stories, revenge stories, family betrayal, toxic family drama, stolen inheritance twists, and grounded karma endings, please like, comment, and subscribe for more.